Hello, Labbers. Today we're going to be shifting gears a little bit. So we're going to get into our research article unit, which I'm really excited for because when I first started grad school, I had read research articles before in undergrad, but not many. A lot of my reading had been in textbooks, and to be honest, I didn't usually do it because the lectures with the professors were typically enough, and I would just review the slides or compare notes with friends. But once you start getting into grad school or just your career in general, reading research articles is a huge chunk of what you do. It first of all gives you a lot of great information about the things that you're learning about, and it's kind of necessary to read in order to participate in class. But it's also really important as a clinician, as somebody who's out in the real world working, because if you hear about this new treatment technique and you've never heard of it before, you're going to want to look at the research and be like, does this treatment technique actually work? Is this something that I should be doing? Is it something that's not very effective? Who is it effective for? Maybe it's really effective for children with autism, but it's not effective at all for children with Down syndrome. So that's just something to keep in mind as you move into this unit. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about is how to find an article. And luckily, it's pretty easy to find an article, especially when you're in college. So the first thing that I usually look at is Google Scholar. So I'll just go to Google Scholar and search some keywords that I'm interested in finding out about. Like when I'm finding articles for preschool project, I'll usually look, I'll usually look up like preschool reading, um like language acquisition or something. And then I'll scroll through and just look at all the article titles. And usually the titles are very specific. So they'll be like, study of 52 preschool students with ASD do this. And so then once you kind of find a topic that goes along with what you're looking for, you can click at that, look at the abstract and see if that works for you. Another really great resource is the ASHA practice portal. So if you just Google ASHA practice portal, it'll pop up this page of like every single speech thing you could ever be interested in. And you can click on any of them. And as you scroll through, it'll give you tips for what your like range of practice should be, how you should assess, how you should treat people who you might need to work with. And it'll give you resources for all of that. And at the end, they'll list a ton of resources, and those are great to look through. Some of them you won't have access to, some of them you will. It just kind of depends. But that's really great if you want to look for something very specific, especially by disorder type. Another really great one that I haven't used as much, but I used a lot in undergrad, the SDSU library. So I didn't go to SDSU, so I'm not entirely sure how you guys' library works. But at my undergrad, I went to Butler in Indiana, and we had a really great library. You could just log on with your ID and you had access to pretty much any journal of all time. And you could like scroll through all these journals. You could search for whatever in like JSTOR. So if you are interested in that, maybe look into that a little bit more. Asha Wire is one that I always see. Textbooks are really great resources too. Even though they're not articles, they still have some great information in them. I keep all of my textbooks. I have a huge bookshelf off screen right here, and it has like so many so many textbooks, and I actually refer to them. I put in sticky notes that are color coordinated to different topics, and I'll write a note on the top about what interests me about that page, so that when I'm looking for something, say I'm looking for a very specific assessment form in my assessment book, I'll know like, oh, that's this assessment form, and I'll be able to flip right there. I also sometimes will photocopy those pages and save them on my computer, because I have a whole Google Drive that's organized for that as well. So if I could give you one piece of advice, I'm just going to veer off for a minute here. If you want to skip forward 1 minute, go ahead. But I would recommend at this point right now in your career starting to organize. If you are planning on going to grad school to be an SLP, start organizing your resources now, because I waited and I would kind of save things still as like by class, because I used to do that in undergrad, right? I would be like, oh, okay, like phonology, all of my phonology stuff goes in that class, and all of my like oral rehab stuff goes into that class. Um, but that's not always the best way to organize as a professional. So the way that I organize now is I have a tab for assessment, treatment, and then like handouts, and then research. And under each of like assessment and treatment, I break it down by disorder type. So I have one for like fluency, articulation, language, pragmatics. And then from there, I'll put in all of my resources. And like, for example, under the articulation one, I have it broken down by speech sound or by phonology pattern. And that's really helpful because once you start clinic, you'll start getting clients and making and finding resources and articles that you're sharing with your families, that you work with. And at that point, right then, it's good to organize it exactly where it needs to go. Because I spent hours this winter break, like going through all of the research articles I had, renaming all of them, organizing them in a way that made sense to me. And now I feel really prepared for when I go off into the real world. I know that I can just Google, not even Google, but just like type in my drive bar a certain research study, and it'll pull up automatically, and I'll be able to find that article really quickly. Or if I need a certain resource, I'll be able to search that immediately. Or if I want to look through my S resources or R resources, I'll be able to jump right into that folder and kind of look through and see if I can find something. I know my supervisor right now really likes organizing things by theme. So every month she has a different theme. So for January, she did snow. February, she did feelings. And so then she organizes by like January snow, and then she clicks on that, and then she has it broken down by like language, articulation, whatever. And then she's able to find her resources there, which works for her brain. So just kind of think about the way that your brain works, the way that you usually find things, and try to set down an organization theme now so that as you find these sources, you can save them. And as you're getting these research articles, you can name them how you know you'll be able to find them in the future, and you can organize them as you get them instead of having to go through hundreds and hundreds and do that over winter break right before you graduate, because that was really stressful. Um, so hopefully that will be a tip you take with you. If you can take anything with you, please take that. Organize yourself sooner rather than later. And then the other thing that I have is other research articles. So at the end of research articles, typically they'll list all of their sources, and those sources are obviously usually pretty good places to go, because if they were good enough to source in a good article, then they're probably something you could look into if you want more information. Finally, I put Wikipedia with 2 asterisks. Wikipedia, I think, is a really good starting point. I don't think it's something that you should ever just source. Like, you should never be like, oh, yeah, I found this information on Wikipedia, because it's not peer reviewed. So it's not the most credible source that you could have. But Wikipedia often has sources linked. And so if you can go to those sources at the bottom, it's the same thing as finding a source for a research article. Usually it's going to take you to a website that is like a .org website, .net website, or it could take you to an actual research article. Or if you just need some background information before you start searching, because sometimes you're looking for a topic that you know nothing about and you could be really confused. So if you can go to the Wikipedia page and look up, childhood apraxia of speech, maybe you've never heard of that before. And so you can just read the Wikipedia summary. Now you understand what apraxia of speech is, what some common things about it what some common characteristics are, what some assessment and treatment things are, and then you can start getting into your research because you'll be able to have a better foundation to start researching than if you started from nowhere. But I will say that if you're going to look at something like childhood apraxia of speech, it might be better to go to the ASHA practice portal because they have an actual like tab created by speech language pathologists and researchers about apraxia of speech. So just some things to consider. Also things to consider once you find an article. So some things that I usually look at first before I even read the article is when was this article published? Because if it was published in the 80s, like I've had professors give us articles to read from the 80s, it might not have the most up-to-date information. It might be a really great article and I might use it along with several other more recent articles, but it usually is not going to be like the gold standard because other things build off of it. So that might be a good start, but there might be even more information you can find that's even more up to date. Um, what was the population I like to look at? So was it a diverse population? How many people were in it? If it's a single subject research design or a really small cohort study, it's usually less generalizable results. Maybe it worked for those 2 kids in the study, but maybe it's not going to work for anyone else. So if you have a lot of people in the study and it worked for all of them, then typically you can be like, oh, okay, like if it worked for 100 people, it's probably going to work. If it worked for 2, like maybe it'll work. The problem with speech language pathology is a lot of the research articles have very small populations because it's hard to find people with the disorders we're working with. So if you're specifically looking for children with childhood apraxia of speech, which is a generally pretty rare disorder, it's going to be really hard to get that many people in a certain area be able to come to you for a treatment study consistently, especially if you're trying to narrow it down to a certain age range or grade. Or if you're looking for something very specific within childhood apraxia of speech. So just something to consider. But typically you're going to see smaller studies in speech language pathology than you would in other areas of research, except for in the case of autism. I feel like a lot of the studies with people with ASD are usually pretty large ones in comparison to other studies that you might read about. And then the last one is it reflective of the population you want answers for? And the reason why I'm saying that is maybe you're working on language with a student with Down syndrome and you find a research study about either kids with DLD, which is like a developmental language disorder, or kids with autism. And while that research study is really interesting, it's not answering the question of, is this a good treatment study for children with Down syndrome? So it's just something that you want to consider. It doesn't have to be an end all be all for like, don't read the study, don't consider anything the study says, but it is something you need to keep in the back of your mind. Like, oh, the study was not normed on people with Down syndrome, so I can't really say that this study is going to work for this population. The other thing I like to look at are the research questions. Those are usually going to be listed at the bottom of the introduction section right before the methods. And a lot of papers will actually like break it up and be like, these are our research questions, 1, 2, 3. And that's a really good place to start because then you're going to be looking at exactly what they were looking at. And if it doesn't match up with your one, if it doesn't match up with your question, then it's probably not the article that you're looking for. And then, is the author really well known for their work with a certain population? One thing that I really look at is, so if you're looking at the complexity theory, right, where if you treat a really complex sound or a cluster of sounds, it'll generalize to easier sounds, so you get more bang for your buck, right? You can work on one target and fix like 10 targets instead of having to do each 10 of those targets individually. And there's an author, Garrett, who does a lot of studies with this, and she has worked before with Dr. Barlow. They're from IU, so I feel very connected to them from Indiana. But yeah, I usually when I see a study and I see that Garrett has participated in it, I can think, okay, I trust this study. I know that Garrett does really reputable work. All of her work is well known. She has lots of research and lots of experience with um, children with phonological disorders. So I know that I can probably trust this article. You can also look at the journal it's in. So if it's published through like ASHA Wire, or another really popular journal, you know that it's probably a trustworthy study, right? It's been peer reviewed, it's been approved by a journal that approves articles in a very methodical way. If it's just kind of like this kind of off wing, not well known article, it might not be as reliable. So just keep that in the back of your head. And then also, are the results statistically significant? That means that is it more likely that this research or this result is my words aren't coming to me but like, did treatment actually make a change, or did it just happen by chance, right? That's kind of the question. So as a child grows, for example, with speech, as a child grows older, their speech is going to improve, right? Just naturally, that's what happens. And so when you're implementing intervention, you kind of have to look at, okay, did it change because of this intervention, or did it change because it was going to change anyway, right? Are they statistically significant? And the reason that you want to find this out is because it's a really important factor to consider. Like, does this thing actually work, right? Is the change actually significant? Did it actually do anything, or was it just chance that this happened? And so you're always going to be looking for a p-value lower than 0.05, and that's going to be in the results section. So if you want to skim through the results, look for the p, and it'll tell you if it's less than 0.05, then that's probably going to be a more reliable study than a p-value with a really high number. Hopefully that made sense. My words weren't coming to me. All right, so once you've kind of found your research article, I gave you a lot of sources to look at, some things to consider as you're kind of just browsing, skimming through the article to look for, right? Look, okay, what journal is it? What year is it? What author is it? Do I know any of these things? Which right now you might not, but the more articles you read, the more you'll become familiar with it. Skim through, okay, was the p-value significant? Check. All right. Do the research questions are excuse me, I need to slow down. Are the research articles matching up with what I want to know? Check. Okay, so now you have your article. How are we going to read it? There are lots of different ways. So always start with the abstract. The abstract is just like a brief summary. It's kind of like when you read a novel, there's like the little blurb on the back that tells you what happens in the book. That's the best way to start, right? You're going to find out a very brief summary of why they're looking for this, what they found, who was in the thing, and what the results were. And if you think that the article fits what you want to find based on the abstract, keep reading through. If you read the abstract and you're like, oh, that's not really what I was looking for, then find another article. It's not a big deal. Or save this one to read for later when you have more time. Some things to look for in the abstract is what was the purpose of the research? What was the population? What were the results? And then the last note I have is that reading the abstract is usually not enough. You're going to need to read more and make sure you fully understand the study, especially if you're doing something like citing it in a paper or explaining it to a small group like you guys are going to do. You're going to need to actually read the whole thing. The reason why I said it's usually not enough is if you ever get into the situation where you are a grad student and you have 15 research articles to read in 1 week, and you have to write a paper, and you have to make a lesson plan for your client. Sometimes you don't have time to read all of the research articles. So what I would do is I would read the abstract so I kind of had an understanding of what the study is, and then I would save it away into a folder. Not organized, obviously. Now it is. And I would go back to it once I had time. But for that week, reading the abstract was enough. If you are so stressed out and you don't have time, that's okay. You can read the summary, it'll get you through class. And then when you have more time, you can go back and read that article more closely, especially if it's a population you want to work with. So for me, I want to work with preschoolers, obviously. And so sometimes the more medically articles about like dysphagia, which is swallowing, that's not as relevant to what I want to do. So if I had a really busy week and I was just reading the article to get through the class, reading the abstract is going to be enough for that situation because while it's important information to know, I'm going to get the summary from the abstract. I'm going to get the information I need from the discussion in class, from the lecture. And I know that I'm not going to be working with that population. So I don't necessarily need to be reading a million research articles about that area of study, right? I would try to read them if I could, just to be clear. But if I had, 10 research articles and 6 of them were about child development and one of them was about dysphagia, I'm going to choose to focus on the 6 about child development, right? But usually it's not enough to just read the abstract. You're going to need to read the whole article. I want to stress that, but I also want to stress that mental health is important and I understand that. And I've been there. I'm still a student too. And I always want to be real and honest with you guys because I know that a lot of SLHS students are very type A. They want to get everything done. They want to be perfect. They want to be the best that they can be. It's a pretty competitive major. And just know that your best is okay, right? If you're struggling, it's okay to just do your best for that day or that week, whatever you need, especially because we're in a pandemic. Let's just throw that out there. All right, I'm going off on so many tangents. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so what next? After you read the abstract, everyone has different preferences. I'm going to link an article on the blog post this week that I really liked. I found it just looking for this specific discussion, but I wish I would have had this back when I started grad school because it gives you perspectives from a lot of different students on how they like to read research articles, and everybody likes to read them differently. There's no right way to do it. I listed a couple of ways here which I can go over quickly, but I would really prefer that you guys read over that article because it really opened my eyes and I was like, wait, this is really cool. I really hope they read this. So some prefer to read it beginning to the end. And the reason because of that is I'm very sorry for this lecture this week, guys. Like I am just stumbling over all of my things. Okay, let's slow down. Some people prefer reading from beginning to end because the first paragraph is going to give you the background, then it's going to give you the methods, it's going to lay out what it was, how they did it, then it'll give you the results, which is, what they found, and then finally they'll give you a conclusion. So they'll kind of explain what those results mean, which I prefer to read that information because sometimes the results section is really numbery and confusing for me. Other people prefer to start at the background because then they can understand the topic, and then they'll jump to the results and conclusion so that they can kind of read what the study found. And then if they have any questions about how they found that, then they'll go back up to the methods. Some people prefer to just start at the results and conclusion because they want to see, okay, I read the abstract. I know kind of generally what this is about. What exactly did they find? What exactly does that mean? And then once they like see what they found, then they'll jump back up to the background and see like, oh, okay, so this is what they found. Now let's like see how it fits in with everything. And other people prefer to start with the methods because they're looking for research that was done with a specific population or that followed certain protocols. Because if you're looking for something very specific, then you're going to need that before you kind of waste your time reading everything else, right? So I noted here, try a variety of different ways to find your preferred way. We're going to be doing journal clubs for the next 3 weeks, I think. So I think you're going to be reading 4 articles total because you have one for homework this week. And so as you read these articles, try a different way every time and see which one you like the best, because that'll kind of give you some insight into your preferred method. All of you guys should have a different preference, and that's cool. That's great. That's life. And so then when you do move on to either be a SLPA and you're starting to do some more research, or maybe you do go to grad school, or you choose to join another field, guess what? You're going to have to do research there too, probably. And so that'll just give you a really strong foundation and personal knowledge of how your brain works, which I think is really cool. So homework this week, you're going to be finding, or this week, I'm going to be assigning a research article, and you guys are going to all read it together and break down the information in it and discuss with your small group just to make sure that you are finding what you need in a research article. And then you're going to be finding your own article to present to your small group on Tuesday or Wednesday. And this should be a really great opportunity, right? These presentations should be relatively short, less than 5 minutes each. And I want you guys to just give your group information about the article, like, this is the article I found, this is the title, this is what it was about. Kind of like your own abstract, right? Explain why you chose this article, what you thought was really cool about this article. So if I was going to do it, I would say, hi everyone, my name is Emily. This week I found an article entitled Why Pippa is So Awesome. I chose this article because I really love dogs named Pippa, and this is what they did. And then I would walk through just a really quick synopsis of what the background is, the methods, the results, and the conclusion. So kind of your own little less than 5 minute abstract, just because we want to make sure that we can get through everybody in the hour time zone. And then the coaches might choose to break you into 2 different groups. If they do, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine as well, because you're just going to be getting all the more knowledge. And yeah, just really keep all of these articles in the back of your head, because you guys are going to be using these in a couple of weeks to change all of our preschool project materials. So you guys are finding the best practice, the most up-to-date knowledge that you possibly can, so that we can go in and overhaul all of our preschool project stuff and make sure that it's following best practice right now for preschoolers and bilinguals. So just keep all of this knowledge that you find in your article and that you hear about from your peers, so that you're able to provide really valuable edits and details once we start getting into that in a couple of weeks. If you guys do have any questions about finding or sharing your articles, please let me know, or your coaches know, because we are here to help you. But I would really suggest starting with the how to read a scientific article thing first, because I really liked it, and it's a short read too. So I hope you guys all have a great day and a great week, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.